My name is Natalie Cross, and for 6 years I have lived in the shadows of Adara North. Officially, my title was Senior Data Architect, though in practice I was the firefighter summoned whenever a client's multi-million-dollar project caught fire at 11:45 on a Friday night. I was the one who rebuilt corrupted databases, salvaged collapsing models, and delivered clarity from chaos while the so-called leaders collected applause. I remember one night in particular, the Peterson account. A junior associate had merged 2 massive client datasets without matching the primary keys. The result was a Frankenstein database that threatened to derail an entire pharmaceutical trial. By the time the executives realized the error, our client's VP of Research was already drafting termination letters. They called me, as they always did, with urgency in their voices but no acknowledgement in their eyes. I spent the night rewriting code, restructuring tables, and by 3 a.m., and the trial was back on track. No one asked how I did it. They simply moved on, as if my invisible hands hadn't just saved $200 million in potential damages. This invisibility was my curse and my weapon. Invisibility lets you see everything. Over the years, I've sat silently as 27-year-old MBAs presented my frameworks to the board, fumbling through slides they barely understood. I've watched people lift my code, word for word, and sell it as their innovation. Promotions slipped past me 3 times in 6 years, each rejection wrapped in the same sterile language. Natalie needs to work on her leadership skills. Corporate translation: she doesn't play golf with the CEO's son. That phrase, executive presence, still stings. It was the invisible barrier separating me, a woman in her mid-30s who preferred command lines over cocktail parties from the corner office. The phrase has a history in American corporate culture, a relic of the mid-20th century when leadership was defined less by competence and more by charisma. Boardrooms weren't just places of strategy, they were theaters of performance. And in this theater, I was the stagehand, never the star. Adara North's office was a study in irony. The company sold itself as the vanguard of modern consultancy, exposed brick, kombucha taps, standing desks, and buzzwords plastered on glass walls: synergy, disruption, authenticity. Yet behind that veneer, panic erupted the moment Excel crashed. These were the kinds of places that celebrated innovation in slogans but worshipped tradition in promotions. My office sat on the 16th floor, wedged between the humming server room and a supply closet stocked with fluorescent sticky notes. No window, no accidental visitors. For years it suited me perfectly. Invisibility gave me peace, and peace gave me mastery. But all of that began to change when Horizon Outfitters entered the story. Horizon was no ordinary client. They were a national retail giant with 500 stores across the United States, a brand recognizable in every suburban mall and outdoor plaza from Seattle to Miami. Their deal with Adara North, a $30 million contract to rebuild their entire data infrastructure, wasn't just another engagement. It was the kind of project that defined careers, landed front-page features in Consulting Weekly, and won awards at the National Data Summit. And for the first time, I heard my name spoken in the open air of possibility. During the initial planning session, Marcus Chen, our CEO, broke from his usual habit of ignoring technical staff. He looked directly at me and declared, "Natalie will be instrumental to this project's success. Her expertise is exactly what Horizon needs." For a brief moment, I let myself believe that the years of invisibility had finally ended, that my name would appear not in size 8 font on slide 47, but in headlines, in credits, in the memory of executives who mattered. I began sketching project architectures in the margins of my notepad, imagining the system flows, the predictive models, the boardroom presentations where I would finally take the stage. Hope is a dangerous thing in corporate America. It lifts you just high enough to make the fall feel catastrophic. Because only days after Marcus spoke my name, HR sent out an announcement that would change everything. The email arrived at 9:12 a.m. Chair's subject line dressed in corporate optimism, welcoming our new strategic leader. Below it, the kind of headshot that belongs on a venture fund's homepage. Square jaw, immaculate fade, teeth calibrated to inspire trust at 8 feet. Chase Darrow, Harvard MBA, transformational operator, keynote speaker on authentic leadership in the data age. The copy promised an infusion of client-facing excellence. It read like a press release for a product no one asked for, but everyone would pretend to love until the warranty ran out. By 9:30, Slack had already grown a second circulatory system. Emojis bloomed across channels, the handshake, the rocket ship, the forced enthusiasm of a company trying to convince itself this was the missing piece. I skimmed the bullets of his career, turned around 3 failing startups, led a Fortune 500 digital renaissance, delivered a TEDx talk titled Trust the Signal. The list was as airy as a meringue, not much protein, but it looked tall from a distance. At the 10 a.m. all hands, Marcus Chen took center stage under the mezzanine light, sleeves rolled with studied informality, voice warm enough to roast a marshmallow. Team, please welcome the new engagement lead for Horizon Outfitters. Chase brings a proven track record of client success and visionary storytelling. The phrase visionary storytelling landed like a warning siren in my ribcage. Chase stepped forward as if approaching a friendly jury. He had the walk of a man who'd never had to recover a corrupted warehouse table at 2 a.m. "Thrilled to be here," he said, scanning the floor like a politician looking to adopt a district. Adara North is about to enter its next chapter. Horizon Outfitters is not just a contract, it's a platform. His hands drew invisible rectangles in the air. Platform meant awards for someone, nights and weekends for someone else. Then Marcus did something he'd rarely done in public forums. He spoke my name. Natalie will be supporting Chase across analysis, modeling, and implementation. The room clapped. Supporting. That word again, glitter and grit. My throat tightened, but I kept my expression neutral, pen poised over a blank page where I had already sketched a data architecture that would actually work. The first workday with Chase began at my office doorway. He didn't knock. Men like him talk in declaratives, not interrogatives. "You must be Natalie," he said, leaning into the frame as if he owned the building and was deciding which floors to keep. Up close, he smelled like bergamot in a private airport. "I've heard you're the data genius around here." It was the kind of compliment that came laminated. I nodded. "How can I help?" "I've got some innovative ideas for Horizon," he said, with the relaxed assurance of someone workshopping a keynote. "I'll need historicals on the Pacific Northwest stores and a segmentation draft. End of day." He didn't say please. He didn't need to. The company would supply the politeness for him. By lunch, forward requests arrived like hail. Handle this, grab that, assemble this pull. Chase was a virtuoso at the instrument called Natalie's Time. He'd forward client emails with a single line at the top, "Take it," and then watch from a balcony while I moved the furniture. When I sent back clean work, he replied with a thumbs-up emoji and copied leadership. When I asked clarifying questions, he responded with a calendar invite titled Sync Strategic Alignment, then spent the meeting narrating to me what I had already built. The office reacted to him the way offices are trained to react to men like him, a mixture of awe, curiosity, and competitiveness. The consultants paraded questions at him they already knew the answers to, just to watch him perform the act of answering. The partners tested his lineage with jokes that resembled knives. The analysts, my people, orbited at the edge of his gravity, equal parts wary and fascinated. I caught Sarah from analytics leaning against the kitchen island, whispering, "He talks like a press release," and then flushing when she realized I'd heard. The Horizon deal, meanwhile, grew teeth. The scope ballooned, data infrastructure overhaul, predictive models for inventory, customer churn analysis, demand forecasting across 500 stores, a ribbon of digital transformation threaded through it all. It was a $30 million symphony with no tolerance for a wrong note, and I could already hear dissonance sneaking in through slideware. On the third day at 4:37 p.m., I remember the time because my model had just finished a cross-validation loop. Chase passed my door again. "I'll need your credentials for the Horizon internal folders," he said, tapping his phone like a judge with a gavel. "I'm compiling a preliminary deck." "Those are working files," I said, keeping my voice inside the boundaries of neutral. "Not client-ready." He smiled the way a man smiles when he's certain he'll be believed over you. "I know what I'm doing." Then, as he turned, "Email me the creds." He left behind the faint afterimage of entitlement. I stared at the doorway for a long moment, then at the code still crawling toward a solution on my screen, then at the years that had stacked themselves, neat and quiet, like boxes in a windowless storage unit. Something in me hardened into geometry. Not heat. Heat burns out. This was cold, load-bearing. It didn't happen all at once. Revenge almost never does. It arrives as a design problem. Constraints, edge cases, test suites, timing. That night, I opened a new folder inside the Horizon directory, innocuous in name, damning in intent. Horizon_final_reports_NC. The initials were both signature and camouflage. Half the company used their letters to mark drafts. Then I began to compose. A retention dashboard with inverted calculations disguised under immaculate visualization. A revenue projection glistening with trend lines that quietly used Australian stores in undisclosed Australian dollars. A segmentation model trained on pre-repositioning data that would push Horizon toward suburbs they no longer owned. Each file looked like the kind of thing an executive would praise in an elevator. Each hid a brick in the lining. I didn't lie. Lies get caught by spell checkers. I crafted errors of assumption, the kind that would only surface under pressure, under questions asked by people who knew their winters, their foot traffic, their customer base. I documented the real work, my work, in a secured folder, each source cited, each formula annotated, each choice defensible. And I wrote a quiet watcher, a small script that noted when Chase accessed, downloaded, renamed. The logs ticked like a metronome in the background. Causality is a comfort when you've lived too long in narratives other people write about your competence. I sent him the credentials at 5 p.m. exactly, because precision is a kind of poetry. The files in Horizon _final_reports. _NC should have what you need, I wrote. He replied with a thumbs up. The trap accepted his foot. What followed was a study in contrasts. In morning stand-ups, Chase performed discovery. I stayed up late crunching Q3 projections, he'd begin, gesturing at visualizations I had built 3 weeks earlier. The team gathered around like parishioners. When Sarah raised a brow, "That churn rate feels high," Chase smiled. That's the uncomfortable truth of the data. When Marcus skimmed the deck and murmured, "Impressive," Chase nodded toward me without looking. Natalie supported some data pulls. Supported, always the supporting verb. In the afternoons, he walked leadership through his insights. Retirees as a growth segment, winter inventory inversion, a 40% upswing that ignored the laws of climate and common sense. He spoke like a man certain he could bend reality by naming it. The room wanted to be bent. It's easier than learning elasticity. In the evenings, I worked the other ledger. I polished the real analysis until it shone. Seasonality modeled honestly, retention measured correctly, growth set at numbers an operator could hit without burning their stores down. I rehearsed answers to questions that would come from across a walnut table in a glass-walled room. My documentation binder fattened with time-stamped exhibits, email trails, version histories, access logs. 6 years of invisibility had taught me the oldest American corporate lesson: document everything, because one day the story will need a spine. Somewhere between those quiet nights and the morning performances, the office began to pivot around Chase's gravity. He was invited to sit on an industry webinar titled Retail 3.0, Beyond the Dashboard. He sent an abstract to the National Data Science Conference featuring images accredited to himself, animations that pulsed with the same colors I'd chosen for my decoys. He started scheduling client check-ins without me, looping me in only when a number refused to behave on command. The Horizon executives, to their credit, felt the tug of the wrongness early. Margaret Walsh, their CFO, wrote in a reply all after Chase's preview packet, "Some of these projections seem aggressive." Aggressive was generous for a model that suggested Chicago's December could behave like Miami's June. But polite skepticism will never outperform confident error in a room trained to applaud confidence. As the preliminary review loomed, Monday 9 a.m., floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee that smelled like a promise, I kept thinking of a line a mentor once told me after a different kind of implosion. Charisma is useful. Competence is freedom. I had spent 6 years being useful. I was tired of asking for permission to be free. On Friday afternoon, Chase appeared at my doorway again, knockless as always. "You'll be at the Horizon meeting?" he asked, faux casual, voice pitched to carry. "In case there are technical questions." "I'll be there," I said, hands folded over the leather portfolio on my desk, where the real story waited under tabs and timestamps. He grinned, already halfway out the door. "Good, though I doubt I'll need backup. The work speaks for itself." He wasn't wrong. It would, just not the way he imagined. By the time the office lights dimmed on that Friday evening, my decision was sealed. For years, I had swallowed the invisible diet of corporate America: long hours, vanished credit, the quiet ache of being necessary but never celebrated. But when Chase demanded my credentials, he crossed an ancient line, one that separates collaboration from conquest. He wanted access not just to data, but to ownership. And ownership, in the world of consulting, is currency. I sat alone in my office, the hum of the server room thrumming like a heartbeat through the walls. The cursor blinked against the dark of my monitor, a metronome for decision-making. I could have refused him, yes, but refusal would have branded me uncooperative, the scarlet letter of every consultant who fails to play politics. Instead, I took a different path. If he wanted access, I would give him access, but the kind of access that would leave him entangled, not empowered. The new folder was born at 5:07 p.m., Horizon_final_reports_NC. The initials were my signature and my shield, subtle enough to be overlooked, but personal enough that I would never forget whose hand had drawn the blueprint. Inside it, I began constructing what I can only call a cathedral of elegant ruin. The first file gleamed with dashboards and heat maps, customer retention analysis that looked impeccable to the untrained eye. But beneath the surface, the formulas were inverted. Where Horizon had a healthy 78% retention rate, my model showed catastrophic churn. It was the kind of hidden flaw that a real analyst would catch in minutes, but a charmer in a $2,000 suit would parade as a revelation. The second file, revenue projections. Lines arched upward in glorious ascent, forecasting 40% growth. The colors, fonts, and annotations were flawless. Only the base data betrayed the truth. Australian store sales, calculated in Australian dollars, disguised as U.S. revenue. An error subtle enough to sail through a boardroom, but devastating when reality collided with fiction. The third file, customer segmentation. Here, I reached backward in time. I trained the model on 2014 demographics, when Horizon catered to suburban families, ignoring their repositioning toward urban millennials. On paper, Chase would be advising Horizon to court a vanished audience. The recommendation wasn't absurd, it was just obsolete, and obsolescence is often deadlier than incompetence. And so it continued. Inventory optimizations that flipped seasonal coefficients, pricing models blind to elasticity, competitive analyses that quietly spliced Horizon's data with their rivals. Every file was a sculpture of professional plausibility and hidden catastrophe. I didn't stop at sabotage. I engineered proof. In my private directories, I built the real analyses. Clean, accurate, bulletproof. Every number annotated, every formula explained, every source logged. Alongside it, I crafted a trail of breadcrumbs. A simple Python script sat humming, invisible, recording every keystroke Chase made when he opened, copied, or renamed the files. Digital fingerprints are harder to wash off than cologne. The following week, Chase sank his teeth into my creations. At Monday's stand-up, he beamed as though he'd spent nights in statistical trenches. "I crunched the retention numbers," he announced, gesturing at my corrupted dashboard. "The patterns are sobering." Sarah from Analytics squinted it. "That churn rate seems off. Are we really hemorrhaging premium members?" Chase leaned into the table, voice warm with borrowed gravitas. "Sometimes the data tells us what we don't want to hear." I took notes with a face of glass, each keystroke an act of patience. Outwardly, I played the dutiful lieutenant. Inwardly, I was an architect building a skyscraper with the wrong blueprints and waiting for the steel to buckle. Day after day, Chase forwarded me client requests with curt commands. "Handle this. Need by EOD. Tight deadline." Each time I slipped another carefully constructed flaw into his arsenal. He paraded them to Marcus, to Horizon, even to the broader industry. By week 3, he was headlining webinars about revolutionary segmentation strategies. His slides pulsed with the very colors I had chosen for my traps. The irony was almost poetic. He thought he was stealing brilliance, but what he stole was quicksand. Yet I was not immune to unease. Late at night, staring at the glow of my real models, I asked myself the hard question: was I playing with fire that could scorch the client as well? But then I remembered the email Chase had sent. "Prepare to have your minds blown. These are next-generation insights." He had already distributed the poisoned fruit. My role now was not merely revenge, but containment. To endure, that when the collapse came, Horizon would see who had handed them the rotten core. So I rehearsed. I practiced the language of precision and calm authority, the language executives trusted when chaos loomed. I built a binder thick with evidence, access logs, Slack screenshots, version histories. Each page a brick in the case I would eventually lay bare. By Thursday of that week, Chase stood in the center of the bullpen, soaking up the fluorescent light like a plant engineered for arrogance. "This is breakthrough work," he declared to Marcus, holding up slides I had poisoned. Marcus nodded, half convinced, half distracted. I kept my gaze steady, a silent witness to the unfolding farce. 6 years of invisibility had taught me patience. But now, patience was no longer resignation. It was strategy. The trap was set. And Chase, eager for glory, was already sprinting toward it. The beauty of a trap is not in the moment it snaps shut, but in the weeks it takes to lure its prey into comfort. Chase was already living inside mine, wrapped in the false security of dashboards that gleamed like stained glass. He didn't see the cracks spidering beneath the surface because men like him are trained to see only the applause. Within days, he was presenting my corrupted files as gospel. At Tuesday's team stand-up, he gestured at a retention chart whose formulas I had inverted. "This is where Horizon is bleeding customers," he said, his voice solemn, as if revealing battlefield casualties. The line of managers around the table nodded gravely. Sarah frowned, murmuring that something didn't add up. Chase dismissed her concern with a politician's smile. Sometimes the data tells us what we don't want to hear. He moved on, leaving doubt in his wake, but confidence in his tone. Every morning he asked for more. "Natalie, pull me a forecast by noon. Natalie, run me a churn analysis overnight. Natalie, we need something bold for tomorrow's client check-in." Each request went into the same folder, the same symphony of destruction. He renamed the files, stripped my initials, and pasted his signature onto the slides. But the logs told the truth. Every keystroke, every download, every rename was etched in my quiet archive. His rise was meteoric. He cut me out of client prep meetings, framing it as freeing me up to focus on back-end modeling. He began to drop my name only in footnotes, the data janitor supporting his innovative methodology. He scheduled webinars where he spoke confidently about rethinking customer segmentation, showing slides I had designed to collapse. He even submitted an abstract to the National Data Science Conference, featuring graphics lifted straight from my decoys, and the office watched, entranced. Charisma is contagious, especially in places that value theater over truth. Analysts whispered about his confidence. Partners praised his polish. Marcus himself nodded approvingly in meetings, calling Chase's strategic insights a breath of fresh air. Invisibility had been my curse for 6 years, but now invisibility was my shield. While Chase basked in the light, I prepared in the dark. The Horizon executives began to notice first. During a Thursday call, Margaret Walsh, the CFO, tilted her head at a slide predicting a 43% revenue surge in Q4. "That seems aggressive," she said carefully. Chase countered without missing a beat. Aggressive opportunities require aggressive strategies. His certainty silenced the room, but the unease lingered. By week 3, questions multiplied. Why are retirees our fastest-growing demographic? Why does churn appear catastrophic when our loyalty program is breaking records? Each time, Chase deflected. He framed skepticism as outdated thinking, rebranding impossibility as disruption. It was a dangerous alchemy, turning doubt into faith through sheer confidence. Meanwhile, I perfected my insurance policy. My real models grew thick with annotations and confidence intervals. My binder of evidence fattened with screenshots, logs, and Slack messages where Chase claimed discoveries he never made. The collection was no longer just revenge. It was a shield for the moment when Horizon realized they were being sold illusions. Yet there was a strange exhilaration in watching the house of cards stack higher. The more he relied on my poisoned files, the more irreversible his fall became. He wasn't just borrowing my work. He was mortgaging his reputation against it. Every presentation, every claim, every email copied to executives pulled him deeper into a narrative he couldn't escape. And I played my role flawlessly. Supportive, agreeable, invisible. When he bragged in meetings, I smiled. When he dismissed my contributions, I nodded. When he forwarded me last-minute demands, I delivered on time, as if loyal to his cause. In truth, I was loyal to a different cause. The truth waiting like a blade under velvet. The preliminary review with Horizon was set for Monday morning. Chase, confident beyond measure, had already sent the preview deck to their executives. The corrupted files were in their inboxes, circulating among board members. I saw Margaret's polite but skeptical reply. Some of these projections seem ambitious. Ambitious was her way of saying absurd. That Friday, Chase stopped by my office one last time. "You'll be there Monday, right? In case they have technical questions." His tone suggested authority, not request. "I'll be there," I said, resting my hand on the leather portfolio where the real analysis waited, pristine and unshakable. "Good," he said, grinning, "though I doubt I'll need backup. The work speaks for itself." And he was right. It would speak for itself, but not in the language he expected. The weekend before the Horizon review felt like the pause before a storm, when the air is too still, too heavy, and even silence seems to hum. Chase had already distributed his corrupted deck, gleaming with projections that defied logic and models stitched together like papier-mâché. Somewhere in Horizon's executive inboxes, those slides were being forwarded, dissected, whispered over, and every time I thought of that, a knot of dread pulled tight in my stomach. Because this was no longer only about revenge, it was about risk. If Horizon acted prematurely on Chase's fantasy, the fallout could cost millions. The weight of that possibility pressed down on me harder than the thought of Chase stealing credit. For the first time, I asked myself whether I had gone too far. But then I remembered Margaret Walsh's carefully worded reply. Some of these projections seem ambitious. Executives had smelled the smoke. My role now was to make sure they saw the fire's true source. I spent that Saturday and Sunday preparing with a precision bordering on obsession. My real analyses had already been perfected weeks ago, but I stripped them down, rebuilt, annotated, and layered them with sensitivity checks. Every chart had its source. Every projection carried confidence intervals. My binder of documentation grew into a weapon of unimpeachable clarity. I rehearsed my explanations in the mirror until my voice lost its tremor. By Sunday night, I was less an analyst than a litigator, armed not with arguments, but with evidence. And then, as if fate wanted to gild the edge of the blade, I discovered Chase's final mistake. While combing through the metadata logs, I noticed a clumsy attempt at tampering. He had tried to backdate the corrupted files, making it appear as though he had created them before I ever shared access. But digital fingerprints are stubborn. Version histories revealed the truth. His copies cloned directly from my originals with timestamps he couldn't erase. It was the equivalent of a forger signing a Renaissance painting with a ballpoint pen. The arrogance was breathtaking. One file in particular, Revenue Projections, Q3, Q4, contained my favorite flaw, the inverted seasonal adjustment formula buried deep in cell AG 247. It made Chicago winters look like summer, suggesting Horizon stock swimwear in December and wool coats in July. For a retail empire that lived and died by seasonal traffic, this wasn't a minor hiccup. It was catastrophic. And Chase had vouched for it personally to Horizon's CFO. The churn model was equally damning. By flipping retention rates, I had made it seem like Horizon was hemorrhaging premium customers. In reality, they were retaining 82% of their most valuable members, a figure that was industry-leading, but in Chase's version, it looked like they were down to 18%. Imagine the panic if Horizon's leadership had believed him. Imagine the changes they might have ordered, scrapping a loyalty program that was actually their crown jewel. Sunday night, my inbox pinged one last time. Marcus Chen, the CEO. Natalie, I'll need you to bring backup materials to tomorrow's presentation. Chase mentioned you have the supporting documentation. There it was, the first thread of doubt from leadership, the first crack in Chase's armor. He was already building his escape route, subtly shifting responsibility toward me. I smiled at the screen, my pulse steady. Of course, Marcus, I typed. I'll bring everything. And I would. 2 presentations side by side, one showing the mirage Chase had sold, the other showing the reality Horizon deserved. That night I laid out my charcoal suit, polished my shoes until they caught the lamplight, and placed my leather portfolio by the door. Inside it sat not just analysis, but a narrative, the true story of who built what and who tried to steal it. As I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., I felt a strange calm. Tomorrow, in a glass-walled room overlooking Lake Michigan, Chase would present 6 files of beautiful lies. And when the questions began, when reality pressed against illusion, the only person in the room with answers would be me. The fuse had burned down. In the morning, fire would meet powder.